Thank you very much, Professor Harlina. We've heard our speakers. We are very thankful for all that they have shared this morning. I think for Prof, I also appreciate your experience and your perspectives brought in on the table today, especially by highlighting the fact that we cannot be stereotyping all the time, but that's what we do. And I think this is the first point where we start by becoming aware of this, because this is how human mind works, of course, at a very basic level, which is instinctive level, fight or flight response, automatic reaction to our environment, but then education should come in and should elevate us to have a broader perspective and to have a more comprehensive approach to things. So with this, I would like to open the floor for questions. For those of you who have questions or comments, please walk up to the mic. Use the mic at all times. Kindly do not comment or engage in discussion without using a mic. And at the same time, try to be as brief as possible with your comments. So I guess we take 3 questions at a time, and we welcome you.
Hi, I'm Liana from Penang Institute. Thank you, Dr. Heba, for a very enlightening talk. I'm also a scientist, so I'm like Dr. Harlina, like all the terms are very new to me. I think you hit the nail on the head talking about education and this kind of like obedience to one particular mindset, I think, when we know that intellectualism is the core of Islam. My question to you is, at the moment, in Malaysia, we are hanging to secularism as a label to allow discourse. So this kind of like goes against what you're saying, but I would like your comment on that, on how can we move forward when in Malaysia the authorities are clamping down diverse views and discourse on Islam itself.
Thank you very much for your speech. So I'll be very brief here. I come from a third world so-called developing country. And the point is that I really appreciate how it has been all settled out in one frame, which said the secular mind can lead to labeling, and labeling can lead to massive destruction. This is what I'd like to add in part of this statement. So the country that I'm coming from needed change. And when it needed change, it destructed the change by themselves, with themselves. So the point that I'm trying to talk about is they got change through a group of people whom they themselves elected. By the way, this country I'm speaking about is the very same country you were born at. So the point is, now I have a very important question. Why did they fail, even though those people who were secularly minded got them onto the thorn, but at the same time, those people got them back down? Was it because they were labeled as the Muslim Brotherhood? Was it because was it because of poor political management? Or was it because of something I am not aware of? Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Ali, and I am associated with an organization called Istanbul Network for Liberty. It's based in Kuala Lumpur, and I'm from Pakistan. So, and thanks to globalization, we are, working in a very diverse setting. Istanbul Network is a network of think tank leaders from mostly Muslim countries, advocating for religious freedom, political freedom, and economic freedom. So yeah, we were set up in 2011, so nothing to do with recent events in Istanbul. Professor Heba, I'd like to sort of challenge your basic, I think, presentation today, which was very insightful in raising certain questions. First of all, a brief comment. I thought that your presentation would have benefited a lot from an early definition of secularism. How would you explain it? And I thought that came like middle of your talk, which actually led to certain confusion in at least in my mind. But then you clarified, you gave your definition, and then thanks to Professor Kessler, who also provided a historical perspective on the term itself. That was very helpful. And then at the last, Professor Harlina said, what's wrong with labeling? So I like to pick your what's wrong and come back to Professor Heba. So Professor Heba, what's wrong with, let's say, you challenge that a particular sociology or sociology as a political scientist changed their views. Of course, you know, the modern disciplines or the scholars have never claimed sort of divinity in whatever the conclusions they're deriving at. And if they change their views by observing reality, what's wrong with that? You also seem to be not very happy with the urban policy, and you gave a specific example and you stressed on, like, you describe as urbicide. But I think this is, the fact is that the world is moving towards urbanization, has significantly moved towards urbanization. And actually it has benefited the poor a lot more because actually the poor have come to be urbanized, and they have not, I mean, you are saying that poor have moved out, marginalized, and I'm seeing the world very differently, and I'm seeing that both in developing world and developed worlds, actually they have become part of the urban development. And so what's wrong with this inclusive urbanization? What's wrong with this modern cities like Kuala Lumpur, so livable, which is you know, providing more opportunities to people from all the economic classes, host to you know, a large number of immigrant labor, both legal and illegal, but providing livelihoods. Nothing wrong with that. So I think the whole idea that you know, this modern the modern world and its sort of institutions have to be necessarily challenged. I think it's not conceivable, you know, to my mind, at least from how the world we are experiencing now today. Thank you.
Okay, I will start by the last question before I forget. Nothing wrong with science changing its ideas and develop its methodology, as long as you have not muted other voices. During the time when the theories of the rise of modernization and progress ideas, the voices of those who said you cannot modernize and achieve progress if you neglect the cultural, the spiritual, the role of religion, if you undermine tradition, if you look to non-industrial societies as backward societies, if you deny that colonialism has affected other societies and do not do justice to other civilizations, these voices were not allowed to enter. It is changing now, by the way. I have an experience of contributing to, I was honored to be contributing to the debates and discussions of a group of scholars in a project in London School of Economics that lasted from 2001. I joined around 2003, and the cooperation went on till 2010, and it's now shifting to different forms, which is a yearbook that came out of London School of Economics on global civil society. Before the Arab mind went in, regardless of who it was, and names do not matter, but they were discussing global civil society in terms of the global and in terms of the different forms of networks, the flows of information, flows of funding, NGOs, agendas, advocacies, feminism, economic development, monitoring the performance of, or studying the performance of different forums on the global level, in development, ideas, concepts, etc. But there was no talk about civility. What do we mean by civil society? Because there was an assumption that global civil society is an expansion of the local civil society. When they go trans-border, then they become global civil society. And my argument was that this changes the nature of global civil society in quality. It's not only a mere expansion. When you go global and trans-border, you get freed from the burden of the nation state, ideas and assumptions, etc., and the nature of action itself changes, though you are still under the constraints and the boundaries of the nation state in terms of funding. They can prevent you from traveling to conferences, you know, it's there. We are human beings and we carry passports. But there is also a balance of power, but there is also an opportunity that is outside. There is something developing there that has to do with different modes of civility and understanding of what civility means, meaning modes of living together, not civility in terms of etiquette. And what is the relation between the civil and the violent? To which extent have we been tamed by the nation state that has the monopoly of using force, and I don't say using arms, I say using force, just pushing back when you are subject to injustice, to the extent that we cannot defend our rights anymore. We used to talk about resistance movements 60 years ago. Now we are talking about social movements that have to adhere to the rules set by the nation state, otherwise they are terrorists. And they are going beyond the law. So actually, globalization and our ability to interact contributed in a change in social sciences in the West because the critical views came into that. Of course, all through the 20th century, for different reasons, starting from the Holocaust that moved many Jewish social scientists to the West, whether in other European countries or in the United States, there has been all the time an engagement with other subcontinental sort of traditions, but also people coming from other countries. But globalization helped that. I think the situation is better now. We have a voice, and this was my concern about the notion of Islamization of knowledge. I was part of that project at the beginning as a very junior researcher, and then I found we were talking to ourselves. You should bring that idea, the ideas that you develop in Islamization of knowledge project to the mainstream social sciences worldwide so that they hear different critical views. And as much as we have Frankfurt School as a critical school, we can have Cairo School, we can have Istanbul School, but nobody did that. People were encapsulated in their own talks that they were happy with, and on the other hand, they did not affect the mainstream. So this was the concern, that when they said religion does not matter, policies were drafted accordingly, and it affected our countries and our development. And this is the concern, that we will not allow again, as much as we can, inshallah, that social sciences are only directed by a colonial mind or a mind that assumes superiority of the Western mind or a secular mind that does not respect other dimensions. So this is changing. Secularism is also about historical process. It's not only about ideas. So it takes different formations. And here Talal Asad is very useful to read because he has been trying to compare the different formations of the secular in different contexts and also compare Christianity with Islam regarding Reformation, but also how things changed in the dimension of spheres, as you mentioned, like which sphere is run by which rationale, and the relation between different spheres, and how the overarching, and who decide? I mean, usually the state decides the overarching ideology or trend or way of thinking, while the religious movements want the overarching to be religious, and they put it in sometimes in conflict with other overarching views. So I think the dimension of formation of the secular is also very important because it helps us see, apart from what you think where you stand, when we sit together and see the formation of the secular, you would realize, oh, this did not happen with the consent of people. And here I talk about the city and I talk about the urban, etc. I don't think that the development of urbanization according to the plans of neoliberal expansion of globalization served the poor and benefited the poor. And I object, with all respect to your opinion, that the city is inclusive. And I think that people have the right to have a better life and better opportunities and better jobs where they are. And that economic development in our countries has been focusing on the city and neglecting the rural areas. And in our culture that was westernized, colonized, and secularized, there is some sort of disrespect, and I wouldn't say discrimination, psychological one, against rural areas and against Bedouins and nomads. I just read on the Facebook yesterday, someone was saying, oh, these Bedouins, because we have Bedouins actually in Egypt everywhere. We have Bedouins in Sinai, we have Bedouins in the northern coast of Egypt on the Mediterranean, we have Bedouins in the south, the Ababda tribes, etc. And they are quite poor, and they are marginalized. And someone was saying, oh, these Bedouins, you can't trust them. They are so uncivilized, savages. You know, it's like, where does this come from? Because through history, the city was considered to be the cradle of civilization, and those nomads are people whom you can trust. Ibn Khaldun changed that. Ibn Khaldun said, actually, civility resides in outside the outskirts of the city, but city is necessary for civilization. And this was the paradox, that you have to shift to the city to establish civilization and to settle and to build, you know, the civilization in terms of structures in all dimensions, the material structure, the cultural structure, etc. But at the same time, something is lost. It goes according to the ideas of Rousseau, the noble savage. The savage was there, but he was noble in the state of nature. He had to be civilized, but in the process of civilization, he lost his nobility and became self-centered, and then he's trying to talk about the common will and try to civilize the city people through the common ideas of the social contract. But he is sad that we lost this noble savage who was enjoying his freedom, etc. So there is a problem. I assume as a citizen in my country that the rural areas should develop in a way that would make this an option for you, graduating from Harvard or Princeton or London or so, to go and live in a village and enjoy a good life. Because your share in development is guaranteed. You don't have to emigrate because the city offers opportunities. I know that this is a trend, but this trend is neoliberal and neocolonial. So I think that a little bit, tiny bit of Marxism is important to analyze some of the things that we hold very important, etc. And going with the counterfactual assumptions, when you said that if we had a different course of reformation, if there was no colonialization, what would have happened to our reformation that took place in the 19th century before colonialism jumped into our territories? I think if the early Islamist thinkers who took political Islam as a mission have read carefully, not superficially, you know, Marxism, it would have been very important for them to actually deal with the development of capitalism as prescribed and as described by Marxism. It could have helped us develop our urban centers in the 40s and 50s in a different way that could have kept the culture life, and we could have given people more say of how they want to design their growing urban centers. But nobody told us, we could not decode. And when I was reading 20 years ago the criticism of Mumford, for example, to the city, where he said this city is corroding morality and corroding civilization, and we have to do something about it, the human being is losing his dignity, blah, blah, blah. You know, this was written in the first half of the 20th century. It could have helped us in Cairo, develop Cairo in the last 50 years in a more humane way. Nobody taught us. And that's why I always say the urban planners will be maybe the first group to be severely punished on the day of judgment, you know, because they didn't explain to us what they were doing, and sociologists as well. They didn't tell people how to decode what was going on around them. We can't see till things are too late to fix. And this is what I used to call in my lectures cementing capitalism. You're turning it into, I mean, what should I do now with a city that looks ugly? With huge urban areas in my city, in Cairo. What can you do? Bomb them, you know, demolish them? You have to deal with them. The best you can do is to tell people that this is not heaven, that this is not giving the poor opportunities, that this is an unjust development of the city, and try to humanize it as much as you can. And there has been experiences in actually humanizing urban dense areas and giving people the ownership and developing them in a specific way and dividing them to turn into very small blocks where people actually can talk to each other and solve their problems and try to sort of develop their space. The question about how, if I understood it right, how religion became a tool of oppression and how secularism looks like a solution. I worked in my PhD on the notion of citizenship in an Anglo-American liberal thought. I traced the development of the semantic field of the notion of citizenship and how it means so many things. And the concept eventually fragmented. You know, so from political, civil, to economic, social rights, to sexual rights, to global citizenship, but nobody managed to glue all these dimensions together, so now we have a very fragmented theory of citizenship. And I realized after long years of research that we have to stop considering some words like magic words. Secularism will be solving our problems. Not necessarily. It has caused more problems in the Arab world because it was part of the authoritarian trend. They claim to be secular. The ambassador of the United Arab Emirates in Washington is claiming in this crisis between the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, that Qatar is fundamentalist and the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are a secular front. Seriously. Seriously. Wallahi al-azim. I can't, يعني, better be polite. Okay? So it's interesting. I mean, I felt angry. I wanted to defend secularism in this position. You know, it's like, please, you don't talk about secularism. You don't talk. Let it be the discourse of someone else, because this is neither secular. The model is neither secular nor, or maybe it's ultimately secular. It's ultra secular in another direction. You know, but the words have been humiliated by the discourse of political powers, actually. And this is also one dilemma. Socialism is great, by the way. The idea of social justice is great. But because regimes in the 60s and 50s exercised so much tyranny in the name of socialism, in the name of the one-party system, in the name of a doctrine that you could not challenge, people felt like, no, we want liberalism. And this was undermined because some groups portrayed Marxism as atheist. People could not benefit from the good description of capitalism provided by Marxists. You know, they could help you understand how the system is functioning, and neo-Marxists contributed. Take it as a critique, take it as a piece of information, take it as an opinion, but to just put it aside and say, I don't need to read all these atheists' works, and it's very important. The misperception of anarchism. If you say anarchism, it means chaos. So you are an anarchist, you want chaos? No, my dear, anarchism is about a minimal state. It's not about chaos. It's the same with people. You say that you have been accused of being both talking about women's rights, so you're secular, wearing a veil, so you are traditionalist. I wrote about the injustices inflicted on Shia minorities in the Gulf states. I've been accused of being a Shia and an agent of Iran. I've never been there, unfortunately. I wish I could visit that beautiful country, but I didn't. And I've been accused of being secular. And I've been accused of being liberal. I've been accused of being jihadi. It's all recorded, Facebook posts and, you know. And I've been accused of being anarchist. I don't remember what else. It's interesting, and I don't find myself in any of these. I mean, it's like anarchism is very interesting to read because it provides you with mechanisms and techniques of non-authoritarian management of a society and the notion of a minimal state. Yet we have a problem with some dimensions. Marxism is important, but it's not complete vision. Shiaism is part of Islam, so I don't have to say, I'm not a Shia. I'm not a Shia. I mean, I'm a Sunni. I'm very happy with my Sunnism, yani. And when I went to Bahrain for interviews, they said to me, you want to become a Shia? Because I was working with the Shia community, attending in the mosque, and I was the only one not praying on the small stone, and everybody noticed that I must be a Sunni. And so everyone, when you talk to them, they are wondering, what is your identity? Why are you interested? And labeling is very interesting. But you have a lot to do with secularism. 1992, with Dr. Abdul Wahab al-Misiri, we had a big, huge conference that came out in 2 volumes. In Arabic, it was about bias in sciences. And it included a paper, as far as I remember, on medicine. And how secularizing medicine is turning it into, instead of hikmah, because we used to call the doctor Hakim, comes from hikmah, comes from wisdom. So he is dealing with the body and the soul as a human entity. And doctors used to be philosophers, Avicenna, yeah, you know. And secularizing medicine means turning it into a profession in the economic sense, detaching the relation with the patient as unprofessional. You don't have to really have a personal relation with your patients because this is unprofessional. You have to just give the prescription or do the operation and goodbye. And turning it into a métier, into a job. So you go and you pay, and I'm doing my job, go on weekends, on vacations, and don't call me, I'm switching my number off. You know, and then surgery, the whole notion of surgery. In Egypt today, there is a big debate about the fact that gynecologists, 90 or 85% of deliveries for the past 20 years have been via cesarean section. And we discussed that in that conference, 1992, actually. So at that time, doctors came and said, there is an urge to do that because of economic reason, tight time. We have to plan our schedules, and we can't wait for this woman to have delivery at 4 o'clock in the morning. So, dear, come at 10 a.m., it's going to be very easy. Epidural. You know what epidural is? Getting anesthesia in the back, you know? And it's like, oh, it's very easy, you will not feel anything, you will see the baby coming out, your lower half is completely, you will not feel, your upper half you are conscious, but you pay it after 10 years, severe migraine. They don't tell you that. They didn't tell us that when I was in London, 2002 or something like that, when it was trendy, you know, and I was like, what? I went to my dermatologist, you know, because I had something in my face, and she looked at me. I was doing something else, you know. I had some things in my face, and then she looked at me like that. Heba, you need the buttocks? There are buttocks, you know. Okay, you have fine lines. I said to her, yes, I have fine lines. I said, I will do it for you for free. You are my friend. So I said to her, okay, what is it? And she said, we make the muscles lame. Is that right? They paralyze. They paralyze the muscle of your face. I said to her, oh my God, why? She said, to look younger. I don't want to look younger. Are you serious? I was shocked when I thought they put something inside, they fill. But I didn't know they paralyze your muscles. So this is secularization of medicine. This is turning the body into a commodity. And it's also denying your right to know the consequences sometimes. And it's a long story. I mean, there is so much to say about each and every dimension of medicine today, and how surgery was part of that secularizing process. You know, it's like surgery is easier, and we don't have to wait. I remember my gynecologist. His father was a gynecologist. His clinic was very old because he took it from his father. And when I went to him and my first child, so I said to him, I want to have a scan. It was very trendy as well. You know, everyone is seeing the baby on the monitor and scanning, etc. And he looked at me and he said, why? So I want to see the child. I want to see the embryo. So I said, why? I said to him, to make sure everything is okay. And he said, I tell you if something is going wrong. Do you know what scan is? So all I know is I will see the baby on the screen. And he said, these are rays. And maybe in 20 years' time, someone will write a research paper saying it had affected this cell in the mind, in the brain, we don't know yet, my dear. I will not use it unless you are in danger. So I said to him, okay. What if the child, يعني لا قدر الله, is, how do you call it, syndrome? Down syndrome. So we need to make sure. So he looked at me and he said, what if he has Down syndrome? So again, I didn't reflect about it. I just, said it. So I said to him, I don't know. He said, you are going for abortion if you know that he has Down syndrome? So I was afraid when he said that. I said, I don't know. He said, my dear, those who have Down syndrome are human beings. They are simply different. And we will not have abortion if your child has Down syndrome. So please stay calm, no X-ray, say, inshallah, the child will be okay, etc. My medical doctor, my gynecologist, was not secular. But he was not talking too much religion. He was not secular because he respected the safety of my baby against new inventions in medicine he didn't want to use to make people feel happy and take pictures. He wanted to use them as a medical doctor when it was needed. And he waited for me to have delivery over long hours. He didn't say, okay, let's just go for cesarean cut. So yes, secularism has to do with each and every specialty, actually. If you are an engineer, if you are an architect, you can see the secularizing mind. You can see how we have different points of views in life, whether you are a doctor, a teacher, how you can be abusive or how you can be compassionate. That's why sometimes to get out of that game that we are in, we are stuck in these polarizations that you mentioned, Elma, is to introduce new concepts. So, or put new concepts and squeeze them because they change the chemical interactions of meaning. So when we talk about freedom, we should also talk about dignity. Why? Give a poor person the freedom to vote. And don't teach him dignity. He will sell his vote. It happens a million times. If people don't have a sense of dignity, that no, my dear, no matter how much you pay me, I'm not going to sell the future of my children because I'm going to opt for a party that is not ruling because the policies are better. If he doesn't have a sense of dignity, his freedom is useless. And it will become an illiberal democracy. So if you introduce dignity, then the conversation changes a bit. What is dignity? Yes, dignity is an ethical and moral concept. You cannot necessarily measure it. The indicators are not necessarily the indicators of quality of life of the UNDP reports. How many rooms do you have in your flat, or the income compared to number of children, or no, it's not like that. Dignity is very qualitative concept, but it adds to the conversation. When you talk about secularism, talk about dignity as well. Talk about that reason is not enough to reach solutions because reason can lead you to injustices as well. And you can find all the different good arguments for an unjust policy. So talk about other concepts as well. Bring them into the discussion. I have a lot other things to say, but I will stop here.
Thank you. My name is John, KJ John. First, I just want to say I'm a student of Sayyid Hussein Nas. So if you know the book Knowledge and the Sacred, he gives his own appreciation and understanding of where both Renaissance and Reformation fits in the larger scheme of things. So in that context, in Nasser's context, I want to extend further the idea of secularism that I've, since I graduated from George Washington, come back and done some studies. I have come to understand that the word secular, the root word is seculum, which had an origin in the initial uses as the in-between time between Jesus' first coming and his second coming. There was one interpretation. So if you take that perspective, it is not an anti-religious worldview. It is a sacred worldview, but that in between those times, let's not go and kill ourselves because he's coming again to judge again. Okay? So from that perspective, I like to commend you for putting policy in its right frame. The root, I was in public policy for 32 years in the government of Malaysia. Policy is really the concern of the world today. And we have reduced everything from policy to politics, which is the ugly version of problems that need to solve in practical majority citizens' lives. And we don't focus on that. Instead, we get into the process and get distracted. So that's just an observation and a comment. Thank you.
Secular. But again, to the formations of the secular, how it started, and then how it ended up being used in different meaning. And this is the interesting thing about following a semantic field of a concept, that how it changes to extent that was unimagined, you know. And these formations and the tools and the tricks, the mental tricks of using it and hiding it and, putting other things next to it, secular democracy, so people love democracy, and hiding also the bad side of democracy. Democracy has to be, you have to be aware of the problems of democracy. It is important, but it's not enough, and citizenship, it's important, but it's not enough. You can carry a passport, but not enjoy the same rights. So many things that come in. What is also, I want to elaborate on after your comment, is what you said about spheres and rationale of spheres. Sometimes religious people play a trick. Islam covers all spheres. Okay, fine. I mean, you are from your name, I assume you are Christian. You also believe that your faith has a say in all your field. Honesty in your work, honesty in your marriage, honesty with your children when you tell them about life, etc. But at the same time, you cannot unify the rationale of spheres. And I will give you an example that is a bit funny from the experience of the Muslim brothers. I did not come to your question, so I will be very careful about that. It's too passionate for me to answer you. President Morsi, the late President Morsi, who has been subject to that coup d'etat and who is imprisoned now, during his campaign, that was 2012, after almost 1.5 years of the uprising, came up in a talk show in his campaign of presidency. And the presenter is a very etatist, state-oriented presenter. So he said to him, he was talking, and he had, of course, as a talk show, his audience around, so veiled sisters and many people in the studio, and whatever he says, they clap. I don't like this way, but anyway. And then the presenter said to him, asked him, Khairi Shalabi, if you know what I mean. He said to him, okay, so everything is fine, you don't make mistakes. So he said, no, we don't make mistakes. So he said, okay, I will not talk about your mistakes. You talk about your mistakes, Mr. Candidate, and give me an example of one mistake. So he said, we were wrong in forming the Constitutional Committee that was supposed to draft the Constitution, because when we formed it as the ruling party, we did not take into consideration the diversity of the different political groups on the scene, and this was wrong. And that's why it collapsed, and we were forming another one that is more diverse and pluralistic, etc., and representing different views. So the presenter asked him and said to him, so? And he said nothing. God accepts those who repent. This is something that is the rationale of the religious ritual sphere. The religious public sphere has a rationale of accountability, my dear. So when you make a mistake, it means that your political judgment was wrong. It kept our struggle 6 months back, okay? It held it 6 months, okay? And you should resign from heading the party, because this is a fatal mistake. It means that political judgment, your political judgment is wrong, and you should step down, and someone else who has a better political judgment, learning from the lesson, should step into your position. You don't say, I will repent, pray a couple of rak'ahs, and God will forgive. And this is an example of how the rationale of spheres. Yes, there is a common rationale of spheres in the Islamic perspective, but the manifestations of the rationale are different in different spheres. In Islam, nasiha, giving a good advice, telling someone to be good, you shouldn't do it in public, so that he doesn't become arrogant and say, who are you to give me guidance? You're not pious than me. You should give it in a nice, compassionate way. I noticed that you did that this morning, and I think this was not a very appropriate way to deal with the others, and I suggest you go and apologize, and we are brothers, and but you don't give nasiha politically in a compassionate, secretive way. You do it publicly, you shout. Because politicians don't hear you unless you shout. Okay? And when you shout, they say, sister. No, my dear, I'm not your sister. I am a citizen. In this position, I'm not your sister. I'm your sister if you are proposing to my daughter. Then you can call me sister. And I want my son to marry your daughter. But in public, I'm not a sister of anyone. Okay? And I voted. I have the right to hold you accountable. Mixing these spheres was part of the collapse of the integrity and reputation of the Muslim Brothers. And I was very critical, and you might know that during the rule of the Muslim Brothers, of that. And I said this was unacceptable. And this is not Islamic. This is coming from an Islamic awareness as a political scientist, knowing the Islamic political theory. So people mix everything together, and they don't realize that this is wrong. Oh, you are secular. This was when I was accused of being liberal and secular. No, I'm not secular. You have to be aware that in circles of society, compassion and love and forgiveness is important. But I don't have the right to forgive a war crimes committer, someone who committed war crimes. I'm sorry. This is no space for compassion. This is a space of legal justice. You can't do that. You cannot forgive violations against human rights when you were ruling because you have another deal with those who committed the violations of human rights. Because if you accept that, they will commit the same violations of human rights against you, and this is what exactly happened. So if you want to ask me about why people shifted, because the masses shift with those who are in power, usually. And you didn't understand that. On one hand, at the moment, the Muslim Brothers said, these are pious people, the Egyptian people are religious, they will opt for an Islamic option, just leave people in peace. If they choose, they will choose an Islamic Sharia and an Islamic option. And when you misrepresented that Islamic Sharia through political deals that were not all the time straight, then people turned against that. Of course, there was a media effect, a media campaign before the coup took place. Of course, the culture of Egyptians does not go against the army. If there is a coup, they will say, the army is saving the country. This is the culture of many people worldwide, you know. So there are many calculations. People are neither bad nor good, not angels and not devils. But there are mistakes that need to be learned, and there are today crimes that are committed against the people who carry that doctrine. Some of those crimes are war crimes. They qualify to be war crimes, and they are not acceptable. The fact that they had political mistakes does not give the legitimacy to the actions taken against them. But at the same time, you have to sort of get out of the situation and be fair, to look at the pros and cons of the experience, to learn for the future. Because politics and history taught us that we witness cycles. And I hope that the coming cycle of an Islamic political presence on the street in the Arab world will be much more reasonable than it was. And much more Islamic. Because there was very little Islam in what I saw under the very discourses of Islam, very little Islam at heart of the political matter that I saw. A lot of pragmatism. And when you are saying, I am leading Islamic politics, I'm not only taking care of the legal and the political, I'm also watching God's eyes. Because I know that if I am playing with the word of God, I'm punished twice. This is what the Quran says. The non-believers are punished only one time. The believers who play games with faith are punished twice. Read the Quran again. Because they used the word of God and they did the mistake. If you do the mistake without putting the label of God on it, you are treated like a human being doing a mistake by God. But if you do it with a sticker of God on it, you're punished twice. They had to know, or anybody has to know, that this has limitations. Even the use of religious discourse, no matter what religion, has limitations in politics. You have to know where to stop, and where to stop abusing your own discourse. The same with Marxism, the same with liberalism. I mean, liberalism as a discourse does not allow you to undermine people's rights. On the other hand, not to be secular and not to be liberal in that economic neoliberalism sense. So, fairness, no matter what the doctrine that you adhere to, is very important. This integrity of the political actor is very important. If you lose it, sometimes you lose it forever. Sometimes. And you have to wait 20, 30 years till a new generation comes and picks up on it, does the reformation, and be able to escape that history and establish a new legacy.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. Very good afternoon. I'm Izzah from IRF. When I first got to know about the topic of discussion, Rethinking Secularism in a Globalized Era, Seeing Beyond Modernity. My first impression is such a loaded topic to be discussed. We have like these terms of secularism, globalization, and modernity. In fact, these are more or less related terms and processes. When we understand secularization, globalization, and in particularly modernization, has more or less created the main concept of the modern nation state as we understood it as today. I just want to refer to a theory by psychologist Carl Jung, which from what I've read, he started his point by saying that religion in principle, it helps, it plays the function for a human being to realize the person himself and to a point of to achieve the best potential of the person. While at the same time he counters the situation or the condition of a modern state, which in a way, because of the nature of strong authority, the nature of institutions and laws and the legal system, it creates a framework which could alter the person's mind itself to a point it would create an irreligious person, okay, on the psychological aspect. So I want to relate these processes and this psychological theory to the situation here in Malaysia, which I see over the past maybe several decades. It's not just about modernization, secularization, and globalization. We also have this process of Islamization also happening. So it seems like contradicting, but it happens at the same time. So this is my opinion. I would like to get Dr. Heba to respond. Do you see an advance in modernization, which I include Islamization of state, meaning that there's increasing bureaucracy of religion, there's increasing sense of religious institutions and laws, could actually come up with Muslims who are actually Muslims in terms of identity, in terms of a person, but when you look into the aspect of religiosity, in essence, we are actually going to a person who is less religious. Would you agree to that?
Hello, I am Muziro from IF. Thank you for Dr. Heba for the enlightening discussion today. I'm referred for our conversation before this about the post-structuralists and about the states. Then I think the secularism today, what we discussion today, have to deconstruct the meaning of secularism also. So when we talk about secularism, many people will point to the relation of religion and state, focusing on the institutionalism. But here, I think we also have to focus on the relation of states and authority, which is, I agree to you, that we have to discuss on the policy. But I think secularism also opened the door to the authority to suppress the people, not by religion, but by policy itself. What I mean is, they created the policy that no need to refer on any ethics or any values, that mostly that things come from religion itself. So the policy may be good or bad for the citizens, but authority use their interests as for measurement for creating the policy in the name of state's rationality that differs with religion's rationality. Maybe people will not agree on that, but authority use secularism as tools to protect their interests. So what is your opinion about this?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Ishara Hussain. I'm a former faculty member of Darul Ehsan University, Bangladesh, currently PhD candidate, International Islamic in Malaysia, also co-founder Muslim World Research Center in Malaysia. I would like to give a good information to all of you. In 2006, a good book was published in Bangladesh. Its name is the Reinterpretation of the Muslim Intellectuals. It's a collection of the articles in which one of your interview was translated. This interview is Islam and Democracy, taken by Rosemary Beckler. Do you remember? Open Democracy. I have read this content which you discuss in the interview. I have learned from your discussion, you said we have to focus the Islamic secularism. Do you remember? You discuss elaborately, you emphasize, you have to focus we have to use the Islamic secularism in the context of secular perspective of the world. In this case, you emphasize on the morality, moral responsibility, the using the morality instead of law, instead of the regulation. I think it's a good point. In my first approach, how you have considered today this view, the using of the Islamic secularism or Islamic approach to secularization. This is the first point. Secondly, there was a very historic conference in 1977. It's called Makkah Conference, first world conference on Muslim education. The giant Muslim scholar were participated there, Sayyid Muhammad Naqibul Attas, Sayyid Ali Shah Ismail Azil Faruqi, Hussein Nasser. After the conference, the 6 volumes were published. 1 volume edited by Abdullah Nasib and Ismail Azil Faruqi, Social and Natural Science. You have emphasized on again the necessity of the social science in the domain of Islamic thought. But many Muslim scholars already have emphasized on the issue very intellectually, and they have done lots. We have lots of Islamic literature, the present context. You know, the IIIT published many things, Islamic Academy, Cambridge published many things, Akbar S. Ahmed published his book, Islamic Anthropology. But unfortunately, so-called Muslim liberal scholar who is a Muslim, but in mind the Western, liberal, they are not aware. But if they are aware, but they are not interested to discuss the very highest intellectual literature of Muslim scholar in the present context. Can you explain why? Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Wong. My reading about this secularism is that if we look into the root word, it comes from Latin word. Secular means this age, this world. So that secularism means that whenever we face the modern problem, we don't drag the past. We must face what is here and now. Now, the problem is once we drag the past, so the question becomes, is it your past or my past? Is it your God or my God? If I don't believe in God, but your past, always the discourse is to impose the past into the present problem, economic, political, social. All these, we are human beings facing the here and now the problem. So if you you can say drag in the past and all those, so the question becomes, your past or my past? So how do you resolve this question? Secondly, just now who asked about Carl Jung. I would like to ask, Carl Jung he has talked about shadow, the projection of shadow. When people has no power and you suppress it, they become the seek to power, the political power will become so strong that it becomes destructive. So my question is, how far has Islam looked into the dark shadow? Shadow means something that has suppressed, and yet it manifests in other forms, political power. Religion, Islam has become, in many ways, power religion, a religion for power. Nothing so much about morality, it's political power. So how do they handle this question of political power? Islam towards attitude towards power after they got the power. Thanks.
Yeah, the diversity of the questions is very stimulating. And the diversity of backgrounds is very interesting. The second question actually answers the first question. Because the first question, Ihsan, what were you asking? Again? Yeah. If we yani, people say if we apply Islam through policies, if we apply through the government, if it turns into laws and systems, then people will be able to be more pious and practice their faith, etc. Okay. I believe so. And the second question is somehow related because it says, on the other hand, secularism has been using laws and power to actually secularize. I mean, the state has been secularizing through its laws and systems, etc. So it's also a power issue. It is enforced in a way. And I think that the problem is related a bit to the very last question, when the gentleman asked, why has Islam become a religion of power? Because people were pushed into that shadow that you are talking about. And the dilemma is that when you are colonialized or suppressed, and we have theories of Malik bin Nabi and others, and even Ibn Khaldun when he said that if you are colonialized, if you are conquered, you, instead of trying to stress your identity, you feel that I lost. Maybe the winner, maybe those who are victorious have the best ideas and the best, so you don't necessarily change your faith, but you look like them, you do like they do, you know, because you feel like they must be. This is the fascination of the colonial societies with the West, for example, etc. So one of the problem is that the Islamists went in the Nasserist era in Egypt, for example, or with the Ba'ath in Syria and in Iraq, through a period in the 60s and 70s and late 50s of discrimination and exclusion and torture, and it was only this ultra-secular leftist discourse, you know, and religion was considered part of the culture. It's not a frame of reference. So when they managed for social and political and economic and global reasons to go back to the realm of public sphere and the process of Islamization of the public sphere, they thought that if we can change through policies, like policies have been used to change the society to a secular society through education, economic policies, the discourse in the media, etc., we will change the system upside down and it will become Islamic. And this was a big mistake. And it led to that over-politicization of Islam. But this over-politicization of Islam, to be fair, was a reaction, which was a mistake, because you had a faith, you should have been much wiser than that. It was a reaction to the overstating of the state. There is a very nice book written by Nazih Ayubi, a very important scholar who was a professor at Exeter who passed away, originally Egyptian Christian, and he wrote about overstating the Arab state. It's such a big book, but it's a reference. It's very important. It talks about how the state was overstressed in every aspect of life after independence, because it was building the nation as if the nation did not exist before, you know, and it was building the economy as if we had no economy before colonialization. Okay? And it was responsible for everything, taking the responsibility of everything. And hence, this overstating of the state led to the overstating of the Islamic state, instead of spreading the notions of morality. And we know that Islam has things to say about politics. It's not like Catholicism in structure, in history, in its rationale, and in its practical rationale. But it is a doctrine that it's a vision that has to say about politics and other aspects of life, as much as some Christians actually say today that Christianity also has to say about different aspects of life and are bringing it to the public sphere and the political sphere as well. So we fell into that trap to a great extent as Islamic movements, and I wrote, I think it was 2013, as a way of me thinking and critically about the whole phenomena of Islamism, that actually the problem was not that these movements were Islamic, the problem that these movements were modernist. Because modernism is about centralized power and is about sovereignty, and they wanted to have the sovereignty as Islamic. So they should have gone horizontally, not vertically, without undermining the fact that Muslims have the right to have a government according to what they believe is a just rule. you know, but it wouldn't work this way. And they also wanted to Islamize the Leviathan. And this is the critique that was missing. They said, this is a secular society, this is a secular state, Sayyid Qutb, al-Jahiliyyah, etc. But they missed the point that it's modernist. And you can't Islamize modernism that took the shape of a secular authoritarian system. You can't come and Islamize the experience of Nasser and say Nasser oppressed us. If we just have a charismatic leader like Nasser with that tool of the Egyptian state, we can spread Islam. You can't spread this message with such a Leviathan. The Hobbesian, centralized, sovereign state that does not see the people, where people melt into the system. This is not our state. Our government form of rule is different. It has a different rationale of relation between spheres. It has a very strong moral backbone. It does not use law to promote faith. It uses morality and da'wah, and it sets the laws that guarantee freedom of expression. And if you sincerely believe in your faith and can represent it, you will not be afraid of having other people promoting their own faith. At the end of the day, people have a mind, have brains in their head. If everyone has the right to promote his own faith in the way that actually God ordered him to do according to his faith and belief, then you should have a bet saying that if you just give everybody freedom, then I think that the Islam that I will present to people that is enlightened, protecting their dignity and freedom, would be acceptable by the majority of people. But this is not the case. People feel somehow insecure because of the history after colonialism and during colonialism. It's worth to remember as well that colonialism did not consult people when it dissolved the awqaf, for example. It did not consult people when it changed the educational systems and removed the understanding of faith and the scholarly dimension of reading Islamic sciences. It did not consult people when it built the cities that are the hubs of capitalist transformation of modernization. It did not consult people, it did by force. And the post-colonial state inherited these policies and did not attempt to change it and bring it back to the course. And that's why the dilemma and the paradox and the tension is always there. And this is discussed in a book written by a French social scientist called Bertrand Badi. He wrote a book titled The Two States. As if we have two layers of society historically, the one imposed by the West, the colonial state that became the independent state, and the l'état, the condition of civility that was beneath it of Islamic reformation that was aborted. And the tension is there. Because as one of our professors once wrote an article that was very bitter, but at the same time very realistic, he said, weak, fragmented, but will survive, the Arab nation state. Actually, it didn't survive even. You know, it collapsed over our heads in Libya, in Yemen, or it was meant to collapse to change the map of the Middle East. So I think that we have to on one hand, to recognize the mistakes, as you mentioned, sir, of the Islamic movements in the last 30, 40 years that made you see Islam as a religion of power without compassion, without love, that is not responding to people's needs. But at the same time, responding only to the problems in terms of now and here is not actually necessarily putting aside heritage. And bringing more futuristic or lessons from the past does not mean to manipulate the future. I don't believe that the past and the future and the present are divided from each other. And I think that now and here resulted in 20 years catastrophes from now on, because you have, everyone is talking about futuristic perspectives. You have to calculate how your policies would make this domino effect or snowball move on. But the problem is the snowball of 20, 50 years ago. I cannot ignore it. And I cannot ignore the problems of 15 centuries ago or 2,000 centuries ago and how things developed in different histories. So nobody can claim, according to history, not according to faith, we are not judging faith, that he's clean. All holy doctrines have been basically used to suppress others and to cause wars. And so let's just start by saying, let's learn from human history in different civilizations and different eras, and let's try to bring that into the discussion without imposing it. What if Muslims have a lesson that they can teach the Chinese? What if the Chinese have a lesson from a history or an era or a decade that they can offer us as an example. This is not wrong. Here and now is not enough to help us have a better future, but it's how we are sensitive to how to use it, because the most holy ideas and the most dignified histories that everybody's proud of can be used in the most critical and bad way. When I talk in English, language has its own power. If I talk to Rosemary in open democracy, how can I explain to her shura? How can I explain to her muhasaba? How can I explain to her the difference between different spheres? So I say to her, okay, you want each and every frame to have its own rationale, so the private is private, the public is public, but we will do, you call it secularism? Okay, this is useful, but our secularism differentiation has to be Islamic. It has a frame of reference. I never attempted to translate these interviews. They are not addressed to the Arab audience, and they are not addressed to people who are aware of the Islamic doctrine. They are addressed as a way of argumentation to the Western audience. It's not tricky. I'm not saying different things. I am putting what I just said of differentiation of rationale of spheres, and you can't mix it, otherwise it would be a big mess, unless I use the terms that are current in the Western thought. So I say, okay, differentiation is okay. You call it secularism. If we have to apply it, I have my own version of it. Islam is a frame of reference for such a differentiation. So if you can come up with a better description than Islamic secularism, it's not secularizing Islam, and I explained that in the interview, then please give me a hand. I was not very fond of that title, but it was by the way of argumentation. In the Quran, in the way of argumentation, God says to Prophet Muhammad, when you are talking to Christians who believe that Jesus is the Son of God, we believe he is a prophet. So, قل, say to them, إن كان للرحمن ولد فأنا أول العابدين. If we can prove that God can have a son, I would be the first one to worship. If you take a Muslim who is not very much knowledgeable about Quran and say to him, when you argue with Christians, say to them, if there is a God, if there is a son of God, I'm willing to worship him. They would say this is kufr. Because we don't accept the premise. We will not even say if God has a son, because this is for us unthinkable, okay? It was to Muslims. يعني إذا قلت لواحد النهارده تقول له قل إن كان الرحمن يقول لك لا يا عم استغفر الله ولا حتى هستخدمها في الargumentation. But this was a way of argumentation. It doesn't mean that I accept the premise. It's a way of argumentation. Please prove to me. So if there is a secularism of differentiation, then in that case, I would put it within an Islamic frame because I have a revelation next to reason as well. But we have to work with reason. Like the woman, the nice woman who says, I'm punished by more blood coming out from my body because I did something wrong. This is a mixing of logic. Because she came to you. If she really believes that she should have gone to a sheikh who would give her a small thing in a written inscription in a paper, she put in the water and she drinks and she will be fine. Why did she come to you? Because God created medicine and created illnesses, and it's the body changing its nature across time. And so it's this mentality of mixing rationales that actually led to the disaster we are living in today. It's very interesting that when you talk to kind people and very kind Muslim pious people and genuinely with high integrity and morality, etc., coming from the kingdoms that we have talking in the name of Islam. So they say the ruler has the right to impose morality on the public. Okay? So it's interesting that while they do so, they are not holding the ruler accountable for spending the wealth of the nation. But he is holding them accountable for spending their time and money. And sometimes you don't need too many verses of the Quran. You need some common sense. It's like, I always say, Prophet Muhammad put forward the message of Islam to people who were keen to kill him. And some of them believed in that message because it was simple. It was responding to a common sense. When they heard the Quran, they felt this is calling for virtues. This is calling for justice. In every Jum'ah prayer, the Sheikh says, I don't know whether it's the same in Malaysia, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنكَرِ وَالْبَغْيِ. God orders justice, goodness, and being kind to your relatives, and He forbids bad deeds, الفحشاء والمنكر, wrong actions, and aggression. This is in every Jum'ah prayer. But actually, nobody's listening. So I understand how you see things, but I also think that media plays a very important role in distorting a lot of messages of Islam. Regarding the last question, where you said scholars like Sayyid Naqib al-Attas and Akbar and other professors and scholars since the 70s and the Faruqi before the Triple IT, etc. Actually, we are interested in that. But the challenge is how to bring that into the main discussions of the disciplines and not focus only on the circles of Muslim social scientists, Muslim scholars of so and so, but bring that idea. In one of the conferences that I organized in Cairo within the frame of a research project I was part of, that was on building global democracy. And it had 10 scholars from all over the world. I was the only Arab and Muslim. And we had scholars in the team that had the project for 5 years from the Pacific, from Russia, from Ethiopia, from China, from India, from Europe, from Canada, from the Pacific, and from the Caribbean. And a professor of international relations in Cairo University, her name is Dr. Nadia Mustafa, presented a paper redefining the notion of jihad. And the professors, most of them were somehow either political science or social sciences, of course, because we were working on defining global democracy. And one of them told me, I have never heard something like that before. Because she took the different level of jihad, starting from the spiritual jihad of struggling with your own self, and then saying that jihad is equal to a notion of just war. And she said, I didn't think that. I thought jihad is aggression. And this professor is a very important professor in her domain. When we talked about violence, we invited Chantal Mouffe. Chantal Mouffe is a radical Democrat professor who is teaching in London, and she is on the side of the left, you know. And when she listened to our debates regarding violence and peace and the dynamics between using force and pushing back aggression, but at the same time having moral limitations, etc., she said, I didn't hear anything like that before. And this was in Cairo 2007, right after the 7/7 bombings in London. We had that seminar. So I think this is the mission of Muslims, not to sit in their own circles, but if they have scientific contribution, to bring it to the mainstream academia. And as I said before, in the time of globalization, though globalization had very negative effect on other dimensions in our life, the fact that you bring the world to the disciplines and that you write about things in a sophisticated way is possible. And I've tried it personally, and I saw others doing it, and it brings it to the mainstream. Ziauddin Sardar, for example, in London, who is a good friend, and I've known him for many years, and of course, I learn a lot from him. I translated his book on Mecca lately into Arabic, etc. And we also had these disagreements, you know, and he's a bit sometimes in his ideas controversial, most of the time very critical and super bright, yani super critical and super interesting at the same time. I learned from Ziauddin Sardar, and I learned from the Islamic Foundation in Leicester in London when I came across Muslim Indians and Pakistanis and Bengalis and others, that Islam is revealed in Arabic language, but Islam, the revelation is, Islam is not Arab. And that partly also, we don't know the Ummah. People are willing to die for the Ummah. Some people, when they demonstrate in support of Palestine and there are riots or some chaos, etc., they are shot dead. They die for the cause they believe in, and they are not sad to do so. They are willing to sacrifice and everything, but they don't know the Ummah itself. You have to unpack the notion of an Ummah and to see how complex it is and how it's changing as well. The Ummah, the different cultures. I did not know a lot of things about Indian Muslims, or I learned about Indian Muslims before going to India from the Gujaratis in South Africa. It was a global sort of back way, and we need to do that. We need to recognize that we have cultural differences, that there are contributions. Unfortunately, some of the big names, for example, of the intellectuals in the Muslim world who don't speak in Arabic are not too known to the Arab reader. And I'm currently editing a book, and most of the chapters are written by young researchers, some of them just freshly graduated, on some of the names the Arab reader has not heard of before, or only the small circles, including Sayyid Naqib al-Attas, including Parvez Manzoor, including Kalim Siddiqui, including different voices, and we hope to have a second volume, inshallah. Tariq Ramadan, though he's very well known, amongst the Arab youth, they just might hear the name. Very few have read his work. So even he is Egyptian, but because he originally writes in French and then in English, there is that separation between there are boundaries, linguistic barriers as well, even within the Ummah of Islam, and I think we have to sort of bridge them. So you are right. We should speak more about our own contributions and bring them to the forefront so that people know that this Ummah is not miserable. Even in times of crisis, it has always been producing knowledge and trying to challenge the circumstances. And we hope that we can do that in the most moral and ethical way possible.
We have extended the time immensely so far. Half a minute?
Yes, I would like to elaborate when Islam came first. The Prophet during his time in Makkah, he actually taught morality, values, the traits of character. So it is not historical truth. It is not a hegemonically truth that Islam came to establish power. No. Islam came to establish the command of Allah with the reference of values, morality, traits of humanity. So it is a wrong approach. Islam came to introduce power. So we have to correct our perception about Islam. Islam is a religion of peace. Islam is a religion of good character. Thank you.
Thanks. So we would like to thank our speakers, and we would like to thank you all for your time and attention this morning. We invite you all for lunch, and before that, tomorrow is Dr. Heba's last speech in KL at PJ Library at 11 a.m., so you are welcome to join her. For those who have missed YB Izzah, she will be there tomorrow as well, so you can catch up with it. It's 11 a.m. So I guess we have learned a lot of lessons, a lot of key takeaways. Very briefly, I think Prof. Kessler has urged and has warned against thinking that secularism has to do with immorality, and also has a sort of done justice that there is a lot of merits to secularism, especially in Western perspective, and we should become aware that many things that we take for granted today is actually thanks to secularism, as well as, he has said something that you would very rarely hear elsewhere, that some of the fundamental pillars of secularism has originally been born with the monotheistic religions and its practice. So Dr. Heba, I think the key takeaway for today is that the religious rhetorics and the religious discourse has its own limits, and it should not be abused, and we should have our own balanced take at things. So I would like to thank you again, everybody, Dr. Kessler, Dr. Heba, everybody, thank you.